So let's begin. And good morning, good afternoon. Depending on where you are, maybe good evening. So very warm welcome to Zonta Says Now Intercontinental Think Tank for Asia Pacific and Oceania. So my name is Randy and I'm a member of the Zonta Club of New Territories 2 from Hong Kong. A special welcome to some of you who may be joining from Hong Kong and also from Asia who are sharing the same time zone with us today. So together with Carol, we'll be facilitating today's session and I'll be introducing Carol in a bit. I'd also like to acknowledge Sarah Wong from District 17, who is volunteering and supporting us today with all the technical coordination, the chat box, and also the breakout rooms later. So thank you, Sarah, for helping everything run smoothly behind the scenes. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Carol Theobald, who is the global leader for the Zonta Says Now campaign. So Carol will officially open our session and share more about Zonta Says Now. Thanks to Carol. Over to you.
Thanks, Randy. First, I'd like to do some housekeeping. I'd ask you to please use the chat line to ask questions and make comments. Use welcoming and inclusive language. Ask short, succinct questions and answer questions or comments respectfully. My meeting is recorded, but the discussion in the breakout rooms is not included in the final video. Well, this is our program for today. After a short introduction, we'll hear from our two speakers, and then we have a discussion before we share some other Zonta Says Now news. As Randy mentioned, our hosting team today consists of Randy and Sarah in Hong Kong, me in Perth, Australia, and our guest speakers, Huey Yoong in Kuala Lumpur and Krista Milne in Melbourne. We'll now give a short overview of Zonta Says Now and introduce C40 cities. We use this train to join the dots between climate change and gender inequality. Increased carbon pollution has led to global heating and more extreme weather events. Floods, fires, storms and droughts cause millions of people to lose their livelihoods and homes. And this social disruption magnifies any existing inequality, including gender inequality. Zonta Says Now stops the train by advocating for governments to meet their obligations under the Paris Agreement and closing the gender gaps in decision-making, education, economic opportunity, disaster preparedness, health and safety, as detailed in our statement on climate change. It is sobering to realise that if we don't act now, there could be 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050. Imagine the disruption, poverty and violence. Zonta Says Now seeks climate justice for women and girls so they can prevent, prepare for, respond to and recover from the impacts of climate change on the same basis as men. Back to you, Randy. You're on mute, Randy.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. So before we move into our first speaker, I'd like to briefly set the scene for today's discussion. So you'll hear frequent reference to C40 cities today. And what is C40? So C40 cities is a global network of nearly 100 major cities committed to tackling climate crisis. It recognizes that climate change is not gender neutral. So in cities across our region, from Hong Kong to Melbourne, extreme heat is becoming one of the most pressing risks affecting health, safety, mobility, and care responsibilities, often impacting women and vulnerable communities the most. So with that context, let me introduce our first speaker, Yoong. Huey is the head of implementation for East, Southeast Asia, and Oceania at C40 cities, where she leads the delivery of climate actions across major cities, including, amongst the many, Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta, Quezon City, Bangkok, and Ho Chi Minh. Her work spans energy transition, net zero buildings, climate adaptation, and citywide climate action. Prior to joining C40, Huey led urban sustainability initiatives under Malaysia's National Transformation Program, and previously worked as a management consultant delivering policy and transformation projects across Asia and Africa. including Malaysia's electric vehicle adoption strategy. Huey holds a master's in sustainable cities from King's College London and brings deep regional and global experience to today's conversation. Without further ado, Huey, we're delighted to have you with us. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Randy. And also, good morning, good afternoon to everybody that's joining us virtually. It's lovely to see everyone dialing in on this. And thank you so much for spending a bit of your Sunday with us. So I'm extremely proud to be able to join today's session to share a bit about what we're doing at C40 Cities. So thank you so much for that introduction. And we're also really happy to have Krista, which is from the city of Melbourne. So a city that's very close to my heart. I did my uni degree there. So, hello everyone again. It's lovely to sort of see people from Melbourne as well as New Zealand. And also, I think someone's dialing in from Germany. So I'll share a little bit about what we're doing on mainstreaming inclusive climate action. Obviously, Zonta has a very clear mission in trying to ensure girls as well as women have equality as well as equal access to a lot of things. So hopefully this is something that'll resonate, and I'm really looking forward to actually the breakout a little bit later. So I'm going to share my screen now. I've just got a few slides that we could go through. Let me know if you could see it. All good? Thumbs up? Brilliant. So we've got some big terms here. I think inclusive climate action is something everyone's like, yeah, okay, we all know that we need to not leave everybody behind as we go into looking at climate action. But we also have this really big term called mainstreaming. And I'm going to try to attempt to go through a little bit about what that means over at C40 Cities. I'd also be keen to share a little bit about what tools we actually use, because we all know advancing equality and inclusivity is not easy. It's extremely local, contextually driven. We really need to make sure that we know what is actually going on the grounds. So this is an attempt to make sure that we are able to sort of apply that to very, very specific considerations. So a very quick overview of what inclusive climate action is and why does it matter? So Carol sort of alluded a little bit earlier that climate impacts are definitely affecting everyone. I could see some on the group chats. Obviously, over in Australia, there is wildfires that everyone's worried about. And of course, we're going to hear from Krista about heat, but also things like flooding. And that is actually not unique to that part of the world. Southeast Asia is also an area that gets a lot of this kind of climate impact that's increasingly more pressing. But we all know, whilst we're trying to defer and trying to mitigate some of these challenges, the climate impact is already disproportionately impacting the marginalized group. So whatever it is that we're trying to do in terms of climate action, trying to mitigate and trying to adapt, we must make sure that we do not make it tougher for them. And that's why inclusivity and equity must be prioritized in solutioning. So this is the reason why at C40, this is at the tenet of what we do with all of our cities. We work a lot with them on mitigation, i.e. trying to reduce more greenhouse gases being released into the atmosphere. But we're increasingly working on trying to adapt to these risks that we are seeing already prevailing in a lot of our cities. So if we do not build this into everything that we do in terms of solutioning, we're going to be part of the problem. So we all know that policy and climate action, they will generate benefits if we do it well. So it's things like, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, trying to stop more greenhouse gas being released into the atmosphere, but it also has an opportunity to create good green jobs, safeguarding livelihoods, deliver co-benefits such as clean air as well as health benefits. But most of the time, it might not be equally distributed to the people that we're hoping that it will reach. This is why inclusive climate action is really crucial. We look at it from the lens of not just the action itself, but what is the benefits? What are the benefits? And can that actually be equitably distributed across the society? So this is the reason why in C40, we anchor inclusive climate action on 3 pillars. The first one is probably one that everyone is most familiar with, which is making sure that we actually are inclusive in terms of stakeholder engagement, identification of the communities and the people that we work with. But most of the time, to be very honest, when we speak to cities about this, they're like, yeah, we're already engaging our communities and NGOs and, different sets of people that we're talking to. Why is it that that's not enough? That's because once they usually engage these stakeholder groups, and in some cities do it much better compared to the others, they usually just go on and then they'll go on and design projects and they'll go implement it. So they then forget to continuously to engage these stakeholder groups. But what is more challenging is actually the third pillar, which is really looking at tracking what are some of the actual impacts and outcomes, and are they actually clearly, equitably accessible to all the different society groups. So that is one of the reasons why with the inclusive climate action approach that we take at C40, we try very much to ensure that it is not just the inclusive process in terms of identifying the stakeholders, but we need to make sure that throughout the entire time of designing as well as delivering the solutions or projects, that it is also involving them and the policies are not excluding them. And last but not least, tracking that impact over time and ensuring that it is actually distributed to the people that needs to benefit from it. And also over at C40, because we work with cities in order to accelerate climate actions, we do try very much to look into how do we change the way that cities are working. Now, not in a bad way, not to say that, oh, you have to sort of like, will dictate how you're going to go about it, but we know that cities actually have primary responsibility in service delivery. And we know that everyone's got, limited resources. I think that's not unique. That's the same across the board with all of the cities that we work with. And that's one of the reasons why having to deal with climate action is honestly on top of the usual stuff that you need to do in terms of ensuring basic services are delivered to the citizens. We know that it's not fair. And it's also not easy for the cities. And that's one of the reasons why, as member cities, they actually receive support in terms of technical assistance, but also the information and knowledge and capacity building to ensure that cities are able to sort of mainstream climate considerations into the things that they do in the day-to-day. Obviously, City of Melbourne is one of the star cities in doing that already. So I'm really, really thrilled to hear from Krista later. They are one of a handful of cities around the world that actually have a chief heat officer. This just goes to show how serious they are in taking this issue on board. And when something that is actually mainstream in that way, i.e. institutionalized into the day-to-day work that the cities are looking at in terms of processes, projects, as well as considerations, this allows a lot of these climate actions and considerations to be sort of taken on board and has the priority. And what that means is that it also then hopefully gets the resource that's required allocated to it in order to make things happen. So this is actually a very key part of the work that I'm doing with a lot of our cities around the world in the region. It is not easy because it does require people to change the way that they're doing things. But as we sort of make step changes and educating cities, it's also, more importantly, understanding what their real needs are and tailor make that support. We're starting to see traction coming on board, and that's how we build champions. So very similar to the work that you're doing in ensuring that people can champion for a cause. It is not something that happens overnight. It requires a lot of trust, humility, I would say, and more importantly, really sort of that tenacity and drive to be able to listen to them and work with them in order to see what works. Because culture, local context, political situation, and of course, resources are different across the board with our cities. So I'm gonna share a little bit, a bit of a tool that we actually use in order to try to apply ICA into the day-to-day work that we work with cities. Now, there are numerous tools out there in seeing how we can apply it. It ranges for things like equity assessments, which can be then sort of drive down to a particular sector. So we do a lot of energy equity assessments with cities in Southeast Asia. But one of my favorite tools with ICA and how do we apply that, and we share this often with cities as well as the wider public, is an ICA wheel. So you can see the wheel on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can see that there are multiple layers, starting from the gray bits outside. It says prosperity, followed by place, followed by access, and then it goes down to sort of like the dark gray boxes, which are the different areas and sectors that the particular society group is applicable to. So it's got things like income level, migrant status, gender, of course, a key cause that we're discussing today, race and ethnicity, religion, informality status, whether a person is actually disabled or not, age, as well as working conditions. And then you see the colored bits, the rainbow colored bits, looking at some of the items of whether they have access to or not. So, for example, essential public services. Are they able to participate in civil society? Do they have the education and skills that's required? What about economic prosperity in terms of their employment? What are they working in? Of course, considering planet, i.e., the actual environment, health and well-being, and institution and governance. So there are all these multiple elements that's housed within a wheel. And the reason why we've developed this tool to allow cities as well as people that we work with to help identify groups and also what are some of the issues that are impacting them. Because at the end of the day, everyone that we work with, they hold multiple identities, roles, and also depending on what their status is in the society, there is a very crucial consideration for intersectionality. Now, that's a huge word, but intersectionality simply means that there could be cross-cutting issues that apply to the different stakeholder groups that we're working with. So I've got a small example, just really something that I've just picked it out for us to have to think about. If you as a stakeholder is trying to think of something that could work for a migrant, which is a woman of color that's facing poverty because most likely they're working as a waste picker, meaning they're working in an informal job and also an incredibly dangerous one in a tropical climate. Just as an exercise, looking at the ICA wheel, what do you think some of the issues will apply to this person? I'm happy to hear suggestions. Feel free to unmute yourself, or type some of your potential responses in the chat box, and see what everybody thinks. Just checking in chat box. Yeah, health and well-being, of course, is the first one. There we go. The informality status as well, under working conditions, and you might have very, very poor access to resources, potentially even things like, representation, right? Depending on the status. So there we go. We've got decent pay and conditions as well. So this person might actually be working in a environment that's extremely dangerous. And if they're exposed to heat as well, this could have very, very strong impact on their health and well-being as well. So even just with this very simple example, and this is just one snapshot of potential people that we work with in the society, the challenges and considerations that we need to think about when it comes to solutioning is incredibly important, right? So for example, cities often go like, well, hang on, we can have a cooling center. But just a very sort of high level example. But if it's a cooling center that is not accessible to this person in terms of locality, or they can't go because they have to work round the clock in order to make ends meet, or possibly they are illegal in terms of their legal status, that cooling center is not going to help, right? So you very quickly see when it comes to thinking about climate actions, when we build in that inclusivity side of things, the considerations very quickly changes. And that's why it is so crucial for us to be able to engage with the people that we're working with. And also, sometimes they might not even be on the radar that we can have a chat about. And that's where working with communities and people in building that trust in order to be able to access these people that are underrepresented is so crucially important. From there, we then have to consider what are some of the things that is sort of stopping them to be able to access one of these things that we're looking at, for example, the cooling center. Could it be maybe something that is at a different locality closer to where they're working? Or could be something that's sort of tied to somewhere where they can get some support, perhaps from the same group or NGOs that allows that barrier of entry to be a bit lower. So those considerations very quickly stacks up, but it's so incredibly important to ensure that whatever it is that we're thinking about tackling climate is still accessible to people. And we haven't even gone down to level of education. Are they able to read? There are a lot of things that we take for granted, especially in this part of the world. So we always have people coming to us and say, oh, we'll just have an app and we'll tell everybody that, look, a heat wave is coming, or like, the flood is coming. But there could also be people that A, do not even read English or like the local language, or they might not even have money to afford a phone that has an app. So these are the kind of considerations that we really need to bear in mind as we think about solutioning. So that's just a very, very quick example of what are some of the tools that we use to sort of apply inclusive climate action. If any one of you are interested, C40 has a knowledge hub, and that's actually open to public. On that knowledge hub, it's got a wealth of information across all sorts of different climate actions, ranging for energy buildings, food waste, of course, ICA. So if you're ever interested in finding out more about what other cities are doing, please feel free to check out the C40 Knowledge Hub. You type it into Google, and then it's fairly straight up. You register and then you can log on. So in short, with more and more inequity and resulting unrest, and we can see this across the world, right? Whether if it's politically, economic, or socially, ICA is no longer an option for cities, because that's the only way that we can think about trying to consider that for prosperity, inclusivity, and equitable growth. And the issues that's facing each groups in our society are very varied and nuanced. Understanding the local context is really crucial to ensure that solutioning is effective. And we know that there's no one size fit all and we can't please everybody. But this is where equipping practitioners with tools to try to apply ICA meaningfully is really, really important. And more crucially, it isn't a one-off stakeholder engagement and design exercise. Because if the resulting benefits are not equitably distributed or tracked, it will only serve to exacerbate the trust deficit that's growing between people as well as service deliverers. And one of the things that we can do is to ensure we have transparent, continuous, and recursive monitoring, evaluation, and reporting to allow for course correction and allow for us to deliver long-term results. So there is no one thing that we'll do and we'll get it right away, but that's part and parcel of that journey to ensure that we can actually course correct and make things right as we sort of go along. So thank you very much. Look forward to the discussions later.
Thank you so much, Huey, for those really powerful insights and sharings of the insider tools. Now, we have some time for 3 questions. So anybody who have some questions can just unmute yourself, or you can type it into the chat box. Yeah, we have one question from Carol. Oh, no, that's not a question. There's a Yeah, so how do they vary in how they implement the C40 concepts in the many cities that you have worked with? So Carol has asked the question of that you have seen so many C40 cities. So how do they vary in how they implemented the C40 concepts? Because even though they are all in Asia, but they differ in culture, history, political structure. How do you see the differences when you're implementing? I guess what would be some of the factors that you would take into consideration when you're implementing, and what are the most difficult challenges that you have seen when you were working with them?
Absolutely. That's a spot on question. And Carol, actually, it varies across the 97 cities that we work with. And in the region that I cover, there are 13 cities, and that ranges from, obviously Melbourne, Sydney, Auckland, which is sort of in the Oceania box, and then we've got East Asia, which is Seoul, Tokyo, Yokohama, and then we've got a bulk of it in Southeast Asia and some of the cities that Randy has mentioned at the very start. And obviously, you can see how they range in terms of um, sort of development status, and i.e. income level, the culture and the background, as well as the size of the cities, right? I mean, there's some of the cities that we work with, for example, Jakarta is a city of 16 million people. And then that is just mind-blowing. And you've got some of the cities that are sort of like really tiny. So I think one of the key things really is understanding where people are at in terms of that local context and that constraint, as I mentioned, could be population size. It could be the political system. So some of our cities have mayors that are elected, of course, but we also have mayors that are appointed. And that in turn changes a lot about, what skin do they have in the game, right? Because if you're elected, obviously you're gonna make sure that you're gonna have to walk the talk. If you're appointed, obviously it's a little bit different, it's just more of like you don't have as much skin in the game in that sense. So I think that most certainly is something that differs a lot. The second thing is definitely cultural considerations, right? So in the program that I'm running, it's called Climate Action Implementation Program. In Southeast Asia, we've got Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta, as well as Manila. And we've got another 12 cities across Africa as well as South America. And we work with cities to identify two actions that is highest in terms of impact, and no surprises there for Southeast Asia's energy and buildings. So is Africa as well as South America. But the actions that the cities have chosen were very different. So all three cities in Southeast Asia chose a policy and legislative action, meaning things like passing green building codes, ensuring that policies are updated. So very much sort of like the stick approach, if you notice, because in this part of the world, you cannot rely on goodwill, right? The businesses are going like, oh, if I don't have to do that, like, why should I actually invest and be a green building, right? There's always that sort of mindset. So we knew that in order for us to sort of make things happen with the cities, we need to legislate it. That's the only way that they've got the power to sort of enforce things. But in places like Africa, it's a much softer approach. So it's a lot more about working with the various people in the society, so businesses as well. They are more interested in, we don't really care if you're actually going to legislate this. We know that we'll probably have to do it, but we're more interested in what are some of these soft skills that you can sort of help us have. For example, linking to financing or knowledge sharing in terms of how that's actually gone about. So you can see different things stick, even though they're all sort of like in the same sector. And I'm sure, in Krista's sharing later, we'll be able to see like the nuances in terms of what the cities take into account, depending on where they're at, and also like the constituents as well, in terms of like implementing some of these things. And of course, the ambition level varies as well, because this also very much depends on what resources they have at their disposal. But more importantly, I really think it's more of like whether the people that are working in the cities, are they actually able to have the support and the knowledge in order for them to become a champion? Because most of the time, they're really just doing their jobs. This is something that they've got to think about on top of it. And it's like, if I've got no background in green buildings, how am I going to be able to enforce it? We need to be able to understand from their point of view as well. So that's one of the reasons why the support that we try to render to them, we really need to make sure that it's sort of tailored to, where the cities are.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Huey. It's a very difficult question to tackle because Carol and I are trying to, learn so much from you all together in one go. But I guess I'll leave the time for other participants to ask questions. We have got one from Cheryl, and she asked, how different has been for the community support in these cities?
That's a great one, Cheryl. And I think so. Probably a good place to start would be the three different cities that we're working with from Kai, as I mentioned a bit earlier. So all three cities in KL, Quezon City, and Jakarta, we've actually mainstream ICA into the considerations on how the cities can actually apply this. So in somewhere like, for example, Quezon City, the city is very large. It's 3 million people, and obviously in Philippines and being one of the, the biggest sort of constituency in Metro Manila, there is a lot of informality. But the city has sort of really taken the initiative to engage the different communities. So they call them barangays. Barangays are sort of like a little mini suburbs. And each of the barangays actually have community leaders as well. But to be really honest, it took time to build trust with them because there's a lot of distrust to authority when, like it or not, I don't know if you guys are following, but, there's a lot of corruption happening with like flood mitigation projects, etc. I think that's where really showing that you're sincere in building that trust and that relationship is really crucial. So Quezon City is actually one of our first cities in C40 that's actually able to localize the definition of good green jobs. So they've defined what good green jobs are for them. And they've actually put in a MER system to track what good green jobs are being created, are people actually being able to benefit from that, etc. And they've tried to do that with their informal sector. Again, going back to that waste picker example, because one of the largest landfill in Metro Manila is within the jurisdiction of Quezon City. And somewhere like Kuala Lumpur, where the stakeholder engagement is way less deep. I mean, that's just the honest truth. The city goes like, yeah, we're engaging them. They come for like consultations and stuff like that. And that meant a lot of the people that's within the city, a particular department called LA 21, which is Local Agenda 21, is a movement that's across the world. We have people in the city that also have had to gone down to the ground to build the relationship with these guys. Because again, some of these places could be sort of like almost urban poverty is actually quite right. So they're like, right at the fringe of like Kuala Lumpur, where you have your skyscrapers and what have you, but these guys are actually a lot of them are living in poverty. So again, understanding what their needs are whilst they're sort of in proximity to wealth and all that sort of stuff, had a lot of time that we had to sort of put in the work to make them understand that we're not here to take away your land, we're not trying to kick you out, and that sort of thing. And in Jakarta, uh, is another really interesting application of ICA. So they were like, look, we do want to be more inclusive in engaging the people. And in Indonesia, the way that they actually do planning, and it's a country of like 270 million people, they do planning really from ground up. So literally from like, the sort of street neighborhood level up to the suburb level and then up to the province and up to city and so on and so forth. And it's a process called Musrenbang. So when we introduced the ICA tools to them, they were like, can we actually apply it to this planning process? And we were really heartened by that because it's tough work. And we were talking about like, about 7 layers of 7 levels of people that you need to go through in terms of do this planning. So it again is that kind of relationship building, that trust building that we needed to go down to the ground and make them understand that, look, this is something that will help the city deliver better services to the people and hence, having that buy-in. But it's not always smooth sailing. That's the honest truth.
Thank you, Hui. So I hope that answers Cheryl's questions. Now we have a little bit of time for the last of the 3 questions, and it's from Suzanne. So the question is, do you think Asian cities are ahead in their thinking re climate change and equality across society? So I guess a good way to sort of approach that question is, how are cities in Asia addressing climate change and social equality? Compared to other parts of the world, given that the culture, history, and also equality, as into the conception of, the concept of men and women being a little bit different with possibly some kind of cultural differences in how we interpret it with other parts of the world. So how do you think Asia is handling all this climate change and equality compared to other continents?
I feel it's a bit of a loaded question, to be honest. Well, I think, this is probably a personal view rather than the C40's view. Again, C40 works with like, cities across 5 continents. I'd say just from the last 20 years of working in sustainability, in some ways you could sort of say that the Asian cities are a little bit ahead because and this is again, feel free. I'm really, really keen to hear other people's thoughts about this. Is yes, we've got that, that whole certain cities and certain countries have got like the more patriarchal sort of considerations. But I think as as society develops and people are getting more and more affluent as well, and they realize, the connection between generations, I think there's one of those things, right? Like for example, in Japan and in South Korea, they are really concerned about older people, right? Because of things like heat wave and what have you. And you can see that it's actually there's similarities with the European cities as well, because there is a much larger aging society, and then things like, heat waves, etc., needs to be taken into account. So I would say that they are probably ahead in terms of making sure that everyone is on board and taken care of in that sense. But I wouldn't say that, we're ahead or behind. I think it's just that different cities have different priorities on what they think is crucial in terms of maintaining that social cohesion as well. So in terms of that, they are probably ahead in making sure that everyone has got that equal access to things. But in terms of climate change, of course, it's one thing to do one thing is one thing, but then I mentioned about resources again, right? Because there are a lot of cities, for example, in the Southeast Asia region, are still developing, and they don't have the same kind of resources that have at disposal, for example, to Tokyo, or Seoul, or like some of the European cities. And that could actually kind of like limit what they can and cannot do. And that's where I think C40 comes in to try to plug some of the gaps whenever we are able to. But I think in terms of that general framing of values, in this part of the world, everyone is really keen on making sure that the society as a whole, you keep the harmony, you make sure that you try to leave no one behind. So that is actually a very key consideration in the cities that we work with, which is great. But sometimes they could be limited by, of course, again, resources and or the political situation. Yeah, so I'll say that everyone is really trying to move it ahead. Over the last, I think 10 years or so is where you really see climate change being a real zeitgeist, because it's affecting everybody. It's no longer like polar bears and, ice caps melting. It's things like more and more frequent bushfires. There is no more flooding season. It seems like the entire year, anytime it could happen, that sort of thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are sort of, becoming more in tune to we are actually living through it now. It's not something that's sort of far ahead in future.
Thank you. Thank you, Hui. Thank you so much. So we'll come back to you with the breakout session. So I'll give you time for a little short water break. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our second speaker, Krista Milne, who brings deep leadership and practical experience in climate resilience at the city level. Krista is the Director of Climate Change and City Resilience and Co-Chief Heat Officer at the City of Melbourne. So it is one of the only 8 global chief heat officers focused on protecting communities from extreme heat and helping cities adapt to rising temperatures. She co-leads the team delivering Melbourne's net zero by 2040 agenda alongside the city's broader climate adaptation and resilience efforts. With over 25 years of experience spanning climate action, environmental policy, regulation, and corporate sustainability, Krista is widely recognized as a leading voice on urban resilience and sustainability transformation. So, Krista, thank you so much for joining us today from Melbourne. Over to you.
Thanks so much, everyone. I haven't spoken yet. Can everyone hear me? Great. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much. It's great to great to hear about Zonta, Zonta Now's network. It's fabulous what you are doing, and also great to be sharing this webinar session with C40. C40 has been a huge value to City of Melbourne over the last 20 years. We were one of the founding members of the network in 2006 and have loved, really valued being part of it. So thank you for those nice words. Now I'm going to share my screen, and I will share that I think just when the questions started, my computer overheated and shut down. So I'm just still booting everything up, but I'm lucky to be here. I thought I was going to do it from my phone. Can you see those slides well, everyone? Great. Now I'll just get the right thing on my screen. Yeah, City of Melbourne has been acting on climate change really for, that's not what I want. Sorry, I'm still recovering. From since really the early 2000s and seeing it as critical to our city's livability and our prosperity. Uh, I see many Australians on the chat, so Melbourne will be familiar to you. But for those of you who are from around the world, we start our formal meetings with an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, which is also where City of Melbourne itself is located. And we have the honour of governing the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin, and pay respect to elders past and present. And they have been living on these lands for over 2,000 generations. So we have such an opportunity to learn from them, from their resilience, and from experiencing climate change. So very, very grateful for that leadership. I think you all know, but climate change is impacting, and I shared in the chat, yes, we've just come through a week of climate change being right on our doorsteps. We had smoke in the centre of Melbourne. We had ash landing. I live, 6 kilometres from where this footage was taken, but 6 kilometres from the central business district, and have had ash falling out of the sky yesterday, with the winds blowing in from the regional areas of Victoria where there have been major bushfires and loss of life. And of course, we've had floods in Queensland, and it happens fairly frequently that we're talking about extreme weather events that have become way, way, way more extreme, and I can share some of the impacts on Melbourne. In terms of what we've been up to, as I said, we've really been acting on climate change since the late 1990s. But if we think about really our impact over the last 10 years, we've cut our emissions, our direct emissions, by 80%. We purchase 100% renewable energy. Our urban forest is one of our most critical assets. So we've planted 30,000 trees in that time. And I was riding into the city with my daughter on one of the hot days. I think it was 35 degrees at 10 a.m. And just talking to her about when we stopped at traffic lights, when we're in the sun compared to when we're in the shade, and the measurable difference in comfort just waiting at traffic lights over that time, for it's 3 minutes. And it was the difference between being comfortable and uncomfortable and distressed almost. Water is a critical part of the heat story as well, that you need water to grow the greenery within cities. And we have to, with climate change in Melbourne, there'll be less water overall, but more intense water. So we've been investing in capturing every drop that falls on the city, channeling that into big tanks to ensure that we can keep our parks and gardens green throughout the year rather than watering those systems. We prioritise biodiversity. Cities can be a place of refuge for biodiversity if we prioritise those, and we've been increasing the understory as well as that tree canopy since 2017. We track how many microbats we have in the city, how many butterflies, how many different species, and that's a real joy. And of course, waste. We can't forget that we're continually diverting waste from landfill by running all sorts of programs. So I can't cover everything that we've been doing on climate action in this short time, but I'll talk through a few things and how that works. And really, this is about people. It all boils down to help creating the most livable city, and our people are at the heart of that, really. Whether it's we're working on buildings, it's so that they're comfortable for people. And that's the biggest priority. As I've said, we're already feeling climate change. And in terms of the City of Melbourne, our climate risks are heat waves, flooding, drought, and bushfires, and the impact of those. I'll just talk a little bit about the heat work now. I've got that photo up on screen. So yes, I think Huey mentioned the Chief Heat Officer role that I also hold, so as well as being the Director of Climate Change. And that has been fascinating, to be honest. I was appointed Chief Heat Officer when City of Melbourne was asked to join this global program run out of what was then, they're called the Climate Resilience Centre, funded through Atlantic Council and a Rockefeller grant. And it was about the prioritising increasing awareness of the risk of extreme heat, and also thinking about long-term planning within cities. And that is really because it's known as the silent killer. That image there of flooding, it's really obvious that that's a danger. But the image of heat, what do you think of heat? You think of going to the beach, you think of having a fun time, when actual fact heat kills more people around the world and in Australia and in Melbourne than any other natural climate-related disaster. And almost combined. So all the other natural disasters combined, heat kills more. So one of the stats we like to share is that in Melbourne, the 2009 bushfires, Black Saturday, about 123 people died from being exposed in bushfires over that catastrophic event, but yet 450 died of heat-related illness in the same period. But no one knows that stat. And even it's probably underreported because often they die of things like strokes or heart attacks or those sorts of things which aren't actually reported as heat-related, but it's the heat that's caused that to happen. So City of Melbourne was invited to join this program, and part of that was appointing a Chief Heat Officer. Our organisation decided to augment the role of Director of Climate Change, and I've been working in this space, as you heard, for 20 years, and it's been the biggest wake-up call, and also I've had the most cut-through in the way that when talking about climate action, have got most, I guess, interest from people and understanding, because everyone's been hot. They've experienced not being able to sleep at night and feeling grumpy and unwell the next day because of that, and aware that you have to shelter from that. Everyone has had that, well, in a lot of cities have had that experience. So it's been definitely an eye-opener since we've started down that path. As I talked about drought, we're also exposed to drought, and we've got a big focus on water and bushfires across the community. In terms of my municipality, we are very central, but many parts of Melbourne are exposed to bushfires on the fringes. And of course, we are closely connected to many local councils that experience that risk every summer. But as I said, it's really about the people, and what we know about climate change is it has a multiplier effect, particularly for those that are vulnerable. So people who, for example, are experiencing homelessness, they have nowhere to escape in a heat wave. And a heat wave also causes things like the cost of food to rise. So then people are experiencing homelessness, the multiplier effect of these different impacts really impact those that are more vulnerable in our community most severely, and that's a big focus for our work at the City of Melbourne. And the other part of that is also understanding the gender-related impacts. Women often are disproportionate in the way that they experience climate. Sometimes that's related to physiological differences between women and men. I know that I'm more exposed to heat related, feel the heat more than my partner. It's also related to the roles that we play, where they're caring roles. So where more women are at home looking after children during the day, are trying to escape the heat, and having that is also things. Heat has a significant impact on breastfeeding women, on pregnant women. So we know that women are more disproportionately affected by climate change, and that's something that we bring into our work. It's also about ensuring we maintain our livability, but in an equitable and fair way. So we aim to really focus on uplifting those that are not able to uplift themselves in our work. In terms of where we're heading next, you can see our targets, our ambitious targets there, to be 100% renewable by 2030, which is very close. Well, sorry, the year 2030 is very close, and I can talk a bit more about how we're going about that. Achieving net zero emissions by 2040, increasing our canopy cover to 40%, sourcing 50% of our water from alternative water sources. That's about capturing that water, having permeable surfaces in each catchment by 2030, and diverting waste is how we think about the city and the changes that we're trying to drive. And you can see that these are really long term. And one of the things about, and you heard it a little bit in the presentation from Huey, is that it's big, bold, ambitious, but it's really important that we break those down and take actions to progress those every year and measure those actions every year. We need to work with all communities. We can take action, but we also need to work with our business communities and our residential communities and other levels of government to build that bigger story and create that Melbourne that we want together. And really, there's 4 domains that we operate in. We support people to take actions. We reduce emissions, both from our own impacts and across by working through the grid to support the transition of the electricity grid to 100% renewable, investing in nature across the city, and thinking about our built environment. In terms of the people, our real large focus is supporting our community to be prepared for that extreme weather, and building their disaster resilience and strengthening their capacity to respond to when those hazards and natural disasters happen. One example in that is facilitating community cool places. So over the last couple of days, we have both our libraries, our recreation centres, and some community places like neighbourhood houses and the like have been open longer hours and being welcoming to people who need a place to escape from the heat. Often you hear about where have you gone to go to escape the heat. A lot of people say the movies or shopping centres, which is great if you can afford to. You can afford to spend money if you're welcome, but many people either don't want that experience or actually can't afford to and don't feel welcome in those environments. So we make our libraries welcoming, and we also fund neighbourhood houses and other community organisations who have connections with the people who may not have those finances to be open and welcoming. And we ensure that they have snacks, cold water, something to do that doesn't cost any money. And we also hand out cool kits. And these actually, in the first year we did it, they weren't that well attended, but We've heard that the visitation has grown and grown, which in some cases is sad because we want people to be safe in their own home in that environment if there's a heat wave. But for those that aren't, we want to make sure that they have a safe place to go. One story from the Carlton Neighbourhood Learning Centre last year in a heatwave last year is on a Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. after school. They had 9 Muslim mums and about 30 kids come along to that cool centre. Because the mums had picked up the kids from school, they're hot from a day of school, and they just couldn't go home. They lived in one of the social housing towers in in Melbourne with no access to air conditioning, and that was the place that they went instead of home. So again, it's sad to have to provide that service, but important that we do to ensure that everyone has a place to go. We are also working through understanding how we can support our community to improve their own living environment from a heat wave. So we did some research to understand that 1 in 2 of our community have suffered some sort of energy poverty last year, in that they're choosing not to put on their air conditioner or heater, indeed, when in winter. So they're compromising thermal comfort because of affordability. And so we're starting down an approach to be able to support them to understand more efficient, cost-effective ways to either cool or heat their homes. Importantly, in my community, 93% of people live in apartments, and 86% of those are renters. So we're dealing with a particular cohort, excuse me. So another area is, as I mentioned, reducing the carbon emissions, and we do that through a variety of mechanisms, aiming for 100% renewable energy, zero emissions buildings and precincts, zero emissions transport, and of course waste reduction. One project, and I should just check the time, is the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project, where we went through a bulk procurement process to enable a 10-year contract across 20 organisations for new renewable energy, and the result was this wind farm was built, and we secured a 10-year contract from that wind farm. What that did was provide the bankability. So the wind farm was able to get finance because it had a secure demand. This was about 10 years ago, but still going strong on an approach that has been replicated across the world. Just having some computer problems. I might skip Power Melbourne given the time. As I said, we need to invest in greening, and that really comes across in those heat waves, but it's also a huge value from a livability. People want to be in the centre of Melbourne because people enjoy having greenery. It has improvements in mental health and well-being, and we have had great progress and benefits from investing in a strong urban forest. We really learnt about that in what was called the Millennium Drought in Australia, when a lot of our trees were reaching close to natural life, but that drought, when we were on water shortages and restrictions in Melbourne, some of our trees that were all planted about the same time 100 years ago started to significantly decline in health, and we faced the prospect of all our trees dying essentially at the same time. And so that went about a long-term strategic plan to map and start to replace where needed, and continue to value our urban forests. We plant 3,000 trees per year that's net. So some are reaching their natural end of life, and we're replacing those on top of them. We have an ability to fund and finance private greening. We know that we're running out of space really on public land to continue to grow our urban forest and reach that 40% canopy cover. So we co-fund private greening. So this is an example of an urban rooftop farm that we've provided 50% of the funding to a private building owner to enable that farm to come about in the middle of the city. From our built environment, so thinking about our buildings, we need those to be efficient, 100% renewable to continue and resilient to that extreme weather. So we're working to support the private sector to green their buildings. And as I said, water sensitive urban design, water is a critical part of the story. So we aim to capture as much water as possible and channel it into our green spaces. This is actually a wetland that we built as a big water storage within the municipality, within the central city, to capture it, to clean the flood waters, and to use in our parks and gardens and sporting fields and that sort of thing. So we have multiple projects like this, whether they're wetlands or tanks underground, or even just tree pits and rain gardens throughout the city to really capture and support that greening, as well as protect us from flooding during those extreme rain events. And we're requiring the private sector to really strive for world's best practice when they're building new buildings. So we have recently worked with the state government to update the planning scheme, which requires all buildings to achieve a 5-star Green Star rated tool, which means it's really energy efficient. It's on a pathway to be zero net emissions. It's got greenery built into the building. It's got recycled water and considering sustainable transport across the design. And that's really critical for us to focus on new buildings as well. And then finally, most of our buildings that are going to be around in 90 years are already built. So it's making sure that we're continually investing in those existing buildings, where this is really hard, to be honest, but we are continually developing new tools, understanding barriers, understanding how to change the use with the shift to work from home. A lot of our buildings were filled with offices, and there's lots of vacancies in those office spaces now. So we're supporting current building owners to transition their use to other uses and upgrade them first to be climate resilient at the same time. And as I've said, it's really about everyone being part of it. These are our beautiful tourist volunteers that share the story with the community of our climate action and seeking support. So I might leave it there. I'd love to hear for some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Krista. Thank you. Now, we have a little bit of time, we're a little bit behind schedule, so we have time for 1 or 2 questions. If you can either unmute yourself or type it in the chat box. So, Krista, I guess I'll take the lead. I wanted to refer to the last slide where you have the 2 lovely ambassadors who are telling people about the things that the municipality has done for the city. So, do they just walk around the city to tell other people? How do they spread their word and to raise awareness?
Yeah, they're thanks for that question, Randy. They're really there to help in whatever way that our visitors are looking for. So they have all sorts of accesses to information, but critically, we have supported them to know where to direct people on hot days, in particular, because we find that that's when people are still walking around, but they don't know what to do. So we have developed a map in 10 languages of cool places for people to go. And it's actually called Four Seasons in One Day. So it's sort of playing on the Melbourne experience that the weather changes very quickly. Yeah, so they're really trained to support people in those extreme weather events.
Wow, that's really creative. Now we have a question from Petra. She asked, any other cities in Australia looking at this process? Or is it just Melbourne alone?
Is that the neighbourhood houses or the volunteers?
I think she's
Sorry,
referring to,
just mainly the entire concept of joining this sort of C40 cities project. I
Yeah.
haven't heard of much happening, certainly up in Queensland.
Yeah, so C40, Huey can respond more formally, but Sydney and Melbourne are the only cities in Australia that are members of C40. There is a criteria of certain scale and impact. Brisbane City Council is obviously bigger than Melbourne, but it's, I guess, about the global city and leadership and those sorts of things. So, yeah, I could hand over to Huey whether you're looking at expanding, but it's really for those capital global cities as opposed to more regional councils. But there are other networks that support those councils. So the ICLEI local government for sustainability has members, over thousands and thousands of members across the world, and there's many Australian city councils and regional councils that are members of that network that do the same sort of things.
Okay, thank you.
oh, feel free to jump in if you have any comments on this question. Another question, I guess, that can stem from this is if the city that our Shansen members are living in are not member of the C40 cities, right? What can they do to persuade the government to join C40? And then what can a Zonta club do in terms of advocacy to let more people, especially the cities, to know about C40? So I'll let Hui jump in whenever she's ready. But let's get to the second question. Suzanne says she lives in Ivanhoe, and let me know if the pronunciation is incorrect. City of Bayuli. Other councils in Victoria following the ideals of Melbourne Renewable Energy Project.
Yeah, so actually following City of Melbourne's leadership with the Melbourne MREP, a group of Victorian councils came together and replicated the model just for councils. And I think at last count, there's about 75 councils that have joined together to jointly procure renewable energy. So it's absolutely been replicated by other groups. I think I've heard of a Southeast Queensland group, maybe globally, and certainly by business groups as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in here on the last question and also in fact very much related to this one as well. So whilst not all cities can be a C40 city member, but one of the things that we pride ourselves on and I shared in the chat about the Knowledge Hub, and then Krista, hopefully is something that probably you can also supplement as well. I think the whole point of C40 as an organization is to actually get cities to share knowledge with each other. And even though you're not a direct member, we do a lot with non-C40 cities because the whole point is that we need to get everybody on board to accelerate climate action. So it's not about, if you're not part of that 97, you could sort of take a bit of a backseat and that's totally not what we're intending. So one of the things that we can actually help out is, with our C40 cities, our members, they actually very much do things like this, like what we're doing now, which is knowledge sharing. So we're more than happy to sort of like, if you've got your local councils that want to learn a bit more, feel free to reach out to us and we are more than happy to sort of facilitate the sort of sharing of knowledge. Most of the time, the cities are not asking things like, what should we do? It's more of, how did you go about it? How did you sort of like overcome the challenges and stuff like that? Yeah. So short answer is, more than happy to help. No worries if you're not part of the network, but we're more than happy to sort of help and share like knowledge with other cities that have been doing loads, just like Melbourne.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Now, I wanted to give a thanks to Krista because I know that she's on a tight schedule and with the heat wave going on in Australia, she has a lot to do. So thank you so much, Krista. We are about to go into our breakout rooms, which is going to be a key part of today's think tank. So Miss Wong Sarah will help to place all of the attendees in the Zoom into one of the 4 breakout rooms. So each room will have one question to guide your discussion. So the aim is not to reach a consensus, but just to share perspectives, surface insights, and reflect on today's discussion, which will connect to your own context and your experience in your locality. So before we go into the breakout rooms, maybe you wanted to take a note of the question. So the first question to discuss is, what insights from today most changed your thinking? Or it can be something that challenged your thinking. And the second question is, how can cities prioritize to protect women from extreme heat? All right. So with that in mind, Sarah will put all of us into the 4 breakout rooms, and I'll be jumping between the rooms and to hear your conversation. So just a reminder that there will be no recording in the breakout rooms. So feel free to say what you wanted to say. We'll have about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back together, and then we'll get about 1 minute to share and to conclude what you have discussed. All right. Now let's hear from, I guess, group 1 first. So if you can, anyone from group 1 can just share what you have discussed, your insights, the priorities that you have discussed, and we'll have time for each group for about 1 minute.
It came down to people power.
Paper power.
That if we wanted something to do, we need to act, we need to find out and go to local council and see what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
Randy, what was your group? What did your group do? Yes, Randy.
I'll let Suzanne take the lead because I jumped in halfway.
All right. Sue, there now.
Yeah. So for the first question, not necessarily changing our thinking, but really adding to it, was the fact that we were really impressed with what is actually being done in cities by, really serious, good professionals. And that's really something that's important for maybe even Zonta clubs can help with that, to get that information out there, that there is really a lot of work being done in this area, and that if people feel a bit more positive, that they know a bit more about their own communities, their own capital cities, that might actually help them to come on board to do something themselves. I think that basically for the second question, we only just started to talk about that, but basically we're saying that communities tend to have that information in themselves. So where can people go? So in Australia, one of the very common places for people to congregate a lot during the year is sporting clubs. So maybe that's another area that could be made open at extra times, and they're often used for fire relief and that anyway now. But yeah, we basically take our hat off to both presenters today because we're really impressed with what's being done, and the way that you're encouraging governments at different levels to think about the problem of climate change and what's happening to them.
Brilliant. And I think, Angela, you were in the 4th group, were you?
Yes.
Yes. What did you say?
Yes. Well, in our discussion, we realized it really comes down to being active at your local government level and being engaged and finding out what they are really doing and helping make sure that the needs that we recognize are being heard and then acted upon. Because it's real easy to talk about what we're going to do, but we need to see it done.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So much for the reflective sharing and the very thoughtful discussion. Do you have any feedback for us of what you have heard in your group, or drawing on the conclusions that each of the group has brought in?
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating. Sort of, I was in group one, so that's where the people power came from, and I think that really echoes with what Angela's group was talking about as well. I think one of the key things is that thank you as well, the recognition from Suzanne and the rest of the colleagues. I think at the end of the day, what we can do as individuals is really to hold the people that we've put in power, whether if that is through elections and what have you, accountable. Right, because we know that this is something that's impacting everyone, but there is complicity if we keep silent. So, if there are people that's out there, we know that there is a need, be it heat, flooding, and for example, Angela, right now in the US, it's really quite depressing, to be honest. But I know that also a lot of our mayors there, and then C40 has actually just issued a statement, I think, a couple of days ago on this. Like, the more that the retreat is happening, the more that the cities are stepping up. Because we know that this is a problem that's not going away. That's, it is being faced by everybody. So I think as community leaders, as individual citizens, what we can do is really to try to hold people accountable. And that means that, I really like that point about a lot of the communities actually holding the knowledge as well as information. How do we activate those communities in order for that voice to be amplified, but at the same time taking action, right? So we're not passive in this. Like, if the government is not fixing something, and we'll have to be the ones to sort of step up and make sure that, we can try to still serve the people. So I think really that also obviously resonates a lot with the work that Zonta is doing. You guys have been trying to advocate gender equal climate action, for a long time. So what we need to do is just sort of like really band together and leverage on each other to be able to keep going and make a difference. So thank you so much for having me today. It's been wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for coming on a Sunday to be with us, and for your sharing, your time, your generosity, your sharing of knowledge, your leadership, and everything that you have done for the C40. Thank you so much, Huey. So now I'd like to hand the session back to Carol, who will draw together the key themes that we have discussed, share some closing reflections, and introduce what's next for Zonta Says Now. Thank you for those who are joining us, and for everyone who spent their Sunday with us, especially those who woke up at 4 a.m. I think someone woke up at 4 a.m. from Germany to spend time with us. And thank you for your continued commitment to climate justice for women and girls. Over to you, Carol. Thank you.
Thank you, Rendy. It's been a wonderful session, and thank you, Huey, and also to Krista for amazing discussions. I think Huey actually brought all the themes together really well in her summary of the discussion. So thank you very much for that. What I just wanted to say in my closing remarks was I wanted to bring your attention to the virtual art gallery. Zonta Says Now's virtual art gallery is every year we have the collection, and we'll have the 2026 collection will be launched on Earth Day this year. This painting, for example, is an abstract painting that depicts the pollution and environmental concerns that Marta had experienced. And so she's really concerned that she's not, due to my not believing that we're being told about the safety of their industry. She lives in an oil and gas area, and she's really concerned about how they're processing that and impacting on the community. So in the art gallery, you can share how you feel about anything in the world. We have a lovely little video, and I hope you can hear it. Well, I hope that inspires you to make a submission for the art gallery. Our next think tank is in March, but it's a special one because it's actually an online NGO CSW event. So it'll be held on the evening of Thursday, the 12th of March in New York, which is actually Friday, the 13th of March in 11:30 a.m. in Sydney, Australia. Now, it's actually the same time as Climate Action Week Sydney. So we're trying to combine all the events. So we'll see how we go. The theme will be women and sustainable decision making using our resources. Convention, the 11th to 14th of July. If you've not registered, I really encourage you to do so, to go to Vancouver, where we can actually meet face to face and share the Zonta spirit. At convention, we hope to have the first Zonta Says Now walk at a convention. And as part of your registration, you can pick up a Zonta Says Now t-shirt. And we also hope to have a workshop as well. So thank you, Rendy, for bringing today's session together. And a special thank you to our wonderful speakers for their presentations. Thank you, Huey, for staying to the end. You're wonderful. Thank you also to everyone who joined us from around the world, in the USA, in Europe, as well as Asia, Oceania. Your engagement reminds us that gender equality and sustainability are global responsibilities. And through our Zonta Action, we can support the work of C40 cities and help to build a more sustainable world for women and girls. And before we close, I'm going to stop the screen share and ask you to open your cameras and mics so we can wave each other goodbye. Bye for
Enjoy your
now.
Sunday.
Keep
Bye,
reading.
Carol.
Bye.
Bye, Sue.
Thanks, everyone.